The thud of her body hitting the courtroom floor echoed like a gunshot. Evelyn Vanderwaal, stripped of her fortune, her reputation, and her dignity, lay unconscious on the cold tiles. Above her, her husband Mason didn't even flinch, but the woman beside him, his mistress Jenna, did something far worse. She smiled, a cold, triumphant smirk that said, "I won." They thought Evelyn's collapse was the end of the trial. They thought she was broken, but they didn't know that Judge Harrison Sterling was watching that smile. And they certainly didn't know that inside the judge's chambers sat a hidden recording that was about to turn their celebration into a prison sentence. To the outside world, Evelyn and Mason Vanderwaal were the definition of American royalty. Mason was the CEO of Vandercour, a logistics empire inherited from his father, and Evelyn was the grace that softened his sharp edges. She was a former pediatric nurse who had charmed the billionaire with her genuine kindness and lack of pretension. They lived in a sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, attended all the right galas, and donated to all the right charities. But inside the walls of the Vanderwaal estate, the air was thin, suffocating, and cold. For the last 6 months, Evelyn felt like she was losing her mind. It started subtly. She would misplace her keys, or so she thought. She would forget conversations Mason claimed they'd had. She would wake up groggy, her limbs heavy as lead, with a metallic taste in her mouth that no amount of water could wash away. "You're tired, Ev," Mason would say, his voice dripping with a patronizing concern that made her skin crawl. "You're doing too much with the charity board. You're forgetting things again. It's embarrassing." He started cancelling her appointments. He took control of her phone, claiming she was sending incoherent messages to his business partners. He isolated her from her sister, Sarah, telling Evelyn that Sarah had been speaking ill of her behind her back. And then there was Jenna. Jenna Thorne. 26 years old, with razor-sharp cheekbones and ambition that burned brighter than her intellect. She had started as Mason's executive assistant, but slowly she had seeped into their home life. First, she was just dropping off files. Then, she was organizing the dinner parties. Then, she was advising Mason on which dress Evelyn should wear, because Evelyn's taste was a bit outdated. Evelyn tried to push back. "I don't need her here on weekends, Mason. This is our time." Mason had looked at her with cold, dead eyes. "I need her, Evelyn. She understands the pressure I'm under. You just exist." The final straw came on a Tuesday in November. Evelyn had been feeling particularly ill that week, waves of nausea that left her trembling on the bathroom floor. She had gone to the master bedroom to lie down, only to find the door locked. Through the heavy oak, she heard giggling, low, throaty laughter that belonged to Jenna. And then Mason's voice, deep and unguarded, in a way he hadn't been with Evelyn in years. "Just a few more weeks, Jess. The doctors are already concerned about her mental state. Once the competency hearing goes through, I get power of attorney. Then we're free." Evelyn had frozen, her hand hovering over the brass doorknob. Competency hearing, power of attorney. She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't losing her mind. She was being erased. She ran to the guest room, locking herself in, her hands shaking as she dialed her sister Sarah. "Sarah, please pick up. Please." "Evelyn." Sarah's voice was sharp. "Mason told me you didn't want to speak to me anymore. He said you were having episodes." "He lied," Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's lying about everything. He's trying to have me declared incompetent. Sarah, I think he's doing something to me. I feel sick all the time." "Get out of the house," Sarah demanded. "Right now. I'm coming to get you." But before Evelyn could pack a bag, the door to the guest room burst open. Mason stood there, flanked by 2 private security guards. Jenna stood behind him, checking her nails. "See," Mason said to the guards, gesturing to Evelyn, who was huddled on the floor with the phone. "Paranoid delusions. She thinks everyone is plotting against her. She's dangerous to herself." "I'm not crazy," Evelyn screamed, scrambling back. "I heard you. You and her." Jenna stepped forward, her face a mask of pity. "Oh, Evelyn, you poor thing. There's no one here but us. You've been hallucinating again." That night, Evelyn was involuntarily committed to a private psychiatric facility on Mason's orders. It took 3 weeks and every dime of her sister's savings to get a lawyer to override the order and get her out. But by the time Evelyn walked free, the locks on the Greenwich estate had been changed. Her bank accounts were frozen, and Mason had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences due to extreme mental instability. The war had begun. 3 months later. The trial of Vanderkaur versus Vanderkaur became the tabloid fodder of the year. The narrative was carefully crafted by Mason's PR team, the heartbroken billionaire trying to save his erratic, drug-addicted wife from herself. Evelyn was living in a small, 1-bedroom apartment her sister rented for her. She looked like a ghost of her former self. She had lost 20 pounds. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. The nausea hadn't stopped, even though she was away from the house. Her lawyer was a man named David Ross. He was a good man, honest, but he was outgunned. Mason had hired the firm of Sterling, Cooper, and Vance, sharks in 3-piece suits. "It's not looking good, Evelyn," David said gently, sitting across from her at her small kitchen table. "They have medical reports from the facility. They have testimonies from the house staff, who are all on Mason's payroll, mind you, claiming you were drinking heavily and talking to people who weren't there." "I wasn't drinking," Evelyn said, her voice raspy. She took a sip of water, her hand trembling. "David, he poisoned me." "I know he did." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "I believe you, Evelyn. I do. But without toxicology reports from back then, which we can't get because too much time has passed, it's your word against a pillar of the community. And the Judge Harrison Sterling is tough. He's fair, usually, but he hates theatrics. We need hard evidence." "I don't have access to anything," Evelyn whispered. "My laptop, my journals, everything is in that house." "We have the deposition today," David said. "Jenna is testifying." The mere mention of the name made Evelyn's stomach lurch. The deposition was brutal. Jenna sat across the mahogany table, looking radiant in a white designer suit, playing the role of the concerned employee perfectly. "I just want what's best for Mr. Vanderwaal," Jenna said softly to the camera recording the session. Mrs. Vanderwaal was difficult. She would throw things. She accused me of stealing her jewelry. She was constantly mixing pills with wine. "Objection," David snapped. "Hearsay." "I saw it with my own eyes," Jenna said, turning her cold gaze to Evelyn. For a second, the mask slipped. A smirk, barely visible, twitched at the corner of her mouth. "You are nothing," that look said, "and I am taking everything." Evelyn felt the room spin. The metallic taste was back in her mouth. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Why do I still feel sick?" she wondered. "I haven't eaten anything Mason touched in months." Unless... A horrifying thought struck her. It wasn't poison, or rather it wasn't just poison. She looked down at her hands. The veins were prominent. She felt a flutter in her stomach. Not nausea. A flutter. She counted the months, the chaos of the commitment, the trauma of the eviction, the stress of the legal battle. She had missed her cycle, but she attributed it to the extreme stress and weight loss. She wasn't just sick. She was pregnant. And Mason didn't know. The day of the final hearing arrived with a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the New York Superior Court. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back benches, their pens scratching against notepads like insects skittering. Mason sat at the plaintiff's table, looking the picture of solemn dignity. He wore a navy bespoke suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. Jenna sat in the gallery directly behind him, technically a witness, but wearing a black dress that looked more appropriate for a funeral, Evelyn's funeral. Evelyn sat beside David Ross. She wore a simple grey suit, the only one she had left. She felt incredibly weak. She hadn't eaten in 2 days because the anxiety made it impossible to keep food down. Judge Harrison Sterling entered. He was an imposing man in his 60s, known for his no-nonsense attitude and his piercing blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked only at the files in front of him. "This is the matter of Vanderwaal versus Vanderwaal," Judge Sterling boomed. "We are here to determine the division of assets and the validity of the prenuptial agreement, which Mr. Vanderwaal claims should be upheld due to the defendant's violation of the morality and sanity clause." Mason's lawyer, a shark named Richard Stone, stood up. "Your Honor," Stone began, his voice smooth as silk. "We intend to prove that Mrs. Vanderwaal is not only mentally unfit to manage any assets, but that she engaged in a systematic campaign of emotional abuse against my client. We have witnesses who will testify to her erratic behavior, her alcoholism, and her paranoia." Stone spent the next 2 hours tearing Evelyn apart. He called the housekeeper, who wept fake tears about finding empty wine bottles under Evelyn's bed, bottles Mason had planted. He called the security guard, who described restraining Evelyn when she tried to attack Mason, when she was actually trying to escape. Evelyn sat in silence, shrinking smaller and smaller. Every lie felt like a physical blow. Then they called Jenna Thorne to the stand. Jenna walked up to the witness box with the grace of a runway model. She swore on the Bible without a hint of hesitation. "Miss Thorne," Richard Stone asked, "describe the night Mrs. Vanderwaal was committed." Jenna looked at the jury, then at the judge, her eyes wide and innocent. "It was terrifying, Your Honor. Mason, Mr. Vanderwaal, called me in a panic. He said Evelyn was screaming about people in the walls. When I got there, she was holding a knife. She lunged at Mason. She screamed that if she couldn't have the money, no one would." A gasp went through the gallery. Evelyn stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Liar!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You were laughing. You were both laughing." "Order!" Judge Sterling banged his gavel. "Mrs. Vanderwaal, sit down or I will hold you in contempt." "She's lying," Evelyn sobbed, collapsing back into a chair. David Ross put a hand on her arm. "Evelyn, please. You have to stay calm. We'll cross-examine her." But Evelyn couldn't stay calm. The room was getting hotter. The lights overhead seemed to be pulsing. That metallic taste was overwhelming now, choking her. She looked at Mason. He was watching her, shaking his head sadly for the benefit of the judge. But when his eyes met hers, his expression shifted. It was a look of pure, unadulterated malice. "Die," his eyes seemed to say. "Just die already." Then she looked at Jenna. Jenna was still on the stand, dabbing a dry eye with a tissue. But as she lowered the tissue, she caught Evelyn's gaze. Jenna smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a predator's grin. She mouthed 2 words. "Game over." The rage flared in Evelyn's chest, but her body couldn't support it. The blood rushed from her head. The sounds of the courtroom, the scratching pens, the judge's voice, the rain outside, blurred into a single, high-pitched hum. Black spots danced in her vision. The floor seemed to tilt sideways. "Evelyn." David's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. She tried to reach for the water pitcher, but her hand passed right through it. Her world went black. Thud. The world returned to Evelyn in fragments of white light and the sharp, stinging scent of antiseptic. The last thing she remembered was the way the floor tiles in the courtroom seemed to rise up to meet her face. Now, there was only the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a monitor, and the feeling of a cold IV line taped to the back of her hand. She blinked, her eyelids feeling like sandpaper. "She's awake," a soft voice said. Evelyn turned her head. David Ross, her lawyer, was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner of the hospital room. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, and he was holding a styrofoam cup of coffee that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. Next to him stood a doctor, a woman with severe glasses and a compassionate expression. Where am I?" Evelyn croaked. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back into the pillows. "St. Jude's Medical Center," the doctor said, stepping forward. She checked the monitors. "I'm Dr. Alana Baines. You collapsed in the Superior Court, Mrs. Vanderwaal. You've been unconscious for 6 hours." Evelyn's heart rate spiked on the monitor. "The trial. I have to. Mason." "The trial is suspended until tomorrow morning," David said, standing up and moving to the side of the bed. "Judge Sterling granted a 24-hour emergency recess. But Evelyn, we have bigger problems to discuss. Or rather, solutions." Evelyn looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Dr. Baines pulled a metal clipboard from the end of the bed. Her expression hardened, not at Evelyn, but at the information on the page. "When you came in, we ran a standard toxicology screen because of your low blood pressure and the seizure-like activity you displayed upon collapse," Dr. Baines explained. "We found something disturbing. Evelyn, have you been taking any herbal supplements, or eating anything prepared specifically for you by someone else?" "No," Evelyn whispered. I haven't been eating much at all. Just what I buy at the corner store. But before, when I was at the house, your blood shows high concentrations of thallium," Dr. Baines said grimly. "Thallium? It's a heavy metal," the doctor continued. "Historically, it was used in rat poison. It's tasteless, odorless, and dissolves easily in water or food. Its symptoms include hair loss, confusion, nausea, peripheral neuropathy, numbness in the fingers and toes, and extreme fatigue." Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The confusion, the forgetting, the clumsiness. "Mason kept telling me I was losing my mind," Evelyn said, tears welling up. "He said I was clumsy. He said I was crazy." "You aren't crazy, Mrs. Vanderwaal," Dr. Baines said firmly. "You were being slowly poisoned. The levels suggest a chronic, low-dose exposure over several months, followed by a recent spike, likely ingested within 24 hours of the trial." David Ross slammed his hand against the bed rail, his face red with anger. "That son of a bitch! He dosed you right before court to make you look unstable in front of the judge." "There's more," Dr. Baines said softly. She put the clipboard down and took Evelyn's hand. "Evelyn, we had to be very careful with the treatment to flush the toxins out because, well, we have 2 patients here." The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. "2?" Evelyn asked, her breath hitching. "You're 14 weeks pregnant, Evelyn." The world stopped. Evelyn looked down at her stomach, flat beneath the hospital blanket. A baby. Mason's baby. The baby he had tried to kill along with her. Is Is the baby okay?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling with a terror so profound it felt like physical pain. "Miraculously, yes," Dr. Baines said. "The placenta seems to have filtered some of the toxicity, though we will need to monitor you closely. But the baby's heartbeat is strong." Evelyn began to weep. Not the terrified sobbing of the victim she had been in the courtroom, but the furious, guttural weeping of a mother who realizes a wolf had been in the nursery. David Ross pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking, but his voice was cold as ice. "Dr. Baines, I need full copies of those toxicology reports. I need them certified, stamped, and ready for evidence." "You'll have them," Dr. Baines promised. "David," Evelyn said, wiping her eyes. Her voice had changed. The weakness was gone, replaced by a burning, cold resolve. "Don't file a motion to delay. Don't tell the police yet." David looked at her, stunned. "Evelyn, he tried to murder you. We need to have him arrested." "If we arrest him now, he'll post bail," Evelyn said, sitting up. She ignored the dizziness. "He'll hire the best defense team in the country. He'll claim I took the poison myself to frame him. He'll claim I'm the crazy one, just like he planned. Richard Stone will spin it." "So what do you want to do?" David asked. Evelyn looked at the window, where the New York skyline glittered in the distance. "I want to go back to court tomorrow. I want to finish this. I want him to think he's won. I want him to feel safe. And then I want to bury him." While Evelyn was fighting for clarity in the hospital, Mason Vanderwaal and Jenna Thorne were celebrating at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan. They had a private booth in the back, secluded by velvet curtains. A bottle of Cristal champagne sat in an ice bucket between them. Mason looked relaxed for the first time in months. He swirled the golden liquid in his glass, watching the bubbles rise. "Did you see the look on the old man's face?" He chuckled, referring to Judge Sterling. "He looked disgusted. She couldn't even stand up. Stone says the case is as good as closed. He'll grant the annulment based on fraud and incapacity by Monday." Jenna smiled, slicing into her filet mignon. She looked radiant, the picture of the trophy wife she was so desperate to become. "It was almost too easy, Mark. When she hit the floor, I almost laughed out loud. Did you see her dress? It looked like a rag." "It's over," Mason said, clinking his glass against hers. "The doctors will likely keep her sedated for a few days. By the time she's out, we'll have the power of attorney. We can ship her off to that facility in Switzerland, the one with the high walls and no phone privileges." "Are you sure the supplement won't be detected?" Jenna asked, lowering her voice slightly, though her eyes danced with excitement. "Stone said the standard hospital screen only looks for narcotics and alcohol." Mason dismissed her worry with a wave of his hand. "They won't look for heavy metals unless they have a reason to. And why would they? She's a known psychiatric case. They'll assume she took too many sleeping pills or just had a nervous breakdown." Jenna giggled, taking a sip of champagne. "You're brilliant, darling. Absolutely brilliant." They didn't know. They didn't know that 3 miles away, in the dimly lit chambers of the New York Superior Court, Judge Harrison Sterling was not sleeping. Judge Sterling sat at his heavy oak desk, a singular green-shaded lamp illuminating the files before him. He was rubbing his eyes. He had been a judge for 30 years. He had seen liars, murderers, and thieves. But something about today sat wrong in his gut. It was the smile. He had seen Jenna Thorne smile when Evelyn fell. It wasn't shock, it wasn't concern, it was satisfaction. Harrison Sterling was a man of old-school habits, but he was also a man of paranoia. Years ago, after a defendant threatened his life in the courtroom, he had installed a secondary, high-fidelity audio recording system in his courtroom. one that was voice-activated and independent of the court stenographer's equipment. It was meant for security, to catch threats whispered during recesses. He rarely checked it. But tonight, he had a nagging feeling. He opened his laptop and logged into the secure server. He pulled up the audio file from that morning. Courtroom B, 10:45 a.m. He scrubbed through the timeline. He found the moment of the collapse. The audio spiked with the sound of the body hitting the floor, the gasps, the bailiff shouting for a medic. He listened to the chaos for 10 minutes. Then, the audio went quiet as the courtroom was cleared. The bailiffs had ushered the public out. Evelyn had been wheeled out on a stretcher. The courtroom was technically empty, but the recording continued. The voice activation software picked up movement near the plaintiff's table. Click. Is she dead? A female voice. Jenna Thorne. Judge Sterling leaned in, turning the volume up to the maximum. No, came the voice of Mason Vanderwaal. The audio was crisp. They must have been standing right next to the microphone, embedded in the plaintiff's podium, thinking they were alone in the cavernous room. But she's out of the way. Did you swap the water bottle? I put it in her bag, like you said, Jenna replied. If they test it, they'll just find vodka. It proves she's a drunk. Good girl, Mason said. And the other thing? The sweetener? In her coffee this morning. Just a pinch. Enough to tip her over the edge, not enough to kill her right here. We need her alive to sign the papers, remember? God, she's pathetic, Mason laughed. A cold, heartless sound. I can't wait to burn everything she owns. Judge Sterling sat back in his leather chair. The silence in his office was deafening. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a microfiber cloth. His hands were trembling, not with age, but with a righteous, volcanic fury. This wasn't a divorce case anymore. It was a crime scene. He reached for the phone on his desk. It was 11 p.m., but he dialed a number he knew by heart. Detective Miller, this is Judge Sterling. I need you to meet me at the courthouse. Bring a warrant for the seizure of electronic devices for Mason Vanderwaal and Jenna Thorne. And bring handcuffs. No, don't arrest them yet. Just be ready. We have court in the morning. He hung up. He looked at the empty courtroom on his monitor. You smiled, he whispered to the screen. You shouldn't have smiled. The next morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with tension. Rumors had swirled that Evelyn had died in the night. Others said she had fled the country. When Mason and Jenna arrived, they played their parts perfectly. Mason wore a black tie, looking somber and grief-stricken. Jenna wore a modest navy dress, clutching a rosary beads, a prop that made Judge Sterling's stomach turn as he watched them from the bench. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Judge Sterling entered. He moved slower than usual. He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the gallery. He sat down and arranged his robes. Be seated, he said. His voice was gravel. Your Honor. Richard Stone, Mason's lawyer, stood up immediately. In light of yesterday's tragic events, and Mrs. Vanderwaal's clear inability to proceed due to her medical and psychological crisis, we move for a summary judgment in favor of my client. It is clear she is unfit to stand trial or manage her affairs. Judge Sterling looked at Stone. Then he looked at Mason. Mason nodded solemnly, wiping a fake tear from his eye. Is that so? Judge Sterling asked. You believe she is unfit? The woman collapsed in a fit of hysteria, Your Honor, Stone said. She is a danger to herself. The court acknowledges the collapse, Sterling said, his face unreadable. However, the court has also received a request from the defense to allow Mrs. Vanderwaal to make a statement. Mason froze. Jenna's head snapped up. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The room gasped. Evelyn Vanderwaal did not walk in. She was pushed in a wheelchair by a nurse. She looked frail, her skin the color of parchment. But she was sitting upright, and her eyes were burning with a fire that terrified Mason. David Ross walked beside her, carrying a thick stack of medical files. "Your Honor," David said, his voice booming, "Mrs. Vanderwaal is present and ready to proceed." "This is absurd," Stone objected. "Look at her. She belongs in a hospital, not a court of law." "I agree she belongs in a hospital," Judge Sterling said calmly, "but not for the reasons you think. Mr. Ross, call your witness." "Defense calls Mrs. Evelyn Vanderwaal to the stand," David said. Evelyn was wheeled to the front. She didn't take the witness chair. She stayed in her wheelchair, the microphone lowered to her level. "Mrs. Vanderwaal," David began, "can you tell the court why you collapsed yesterday?" "Objection," Stone shouted. "She is not a medical expert." "Overruled," Sterling shot back instantly. "She may answer." Evelyn took a deep breath. She looked directly at Mason. For the first time in a year, she didn't look afraid. She looked down at him. "I collapsed," Evelyn said, her voice clear and amplified by the speakers, "because for the last 6 months, I have been systematically poisoned with thallium." The courtroom erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. The gallery began to murmur loudly. "Order!" Sterling banged the gavel. "Order, or I will clear this court." Mason's face went white. He leaned over to his lawyer. "Shut her up," he hissed. "She's lying." "This is slander," Stone yelled. "Your Honor, this is a desperate fabrication by a mentally ill woman." "I have the toxicology report right here," David Ross said, slamming the file onto the evidence table. "Certified by St. Jude's Medical Center. Lethal levels of thallium. And traces of the same poison were found in the hair samples we took this morning, dating back 6 months. Jenna started to shake. She looked at the door, calculating the distance. "And," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling slightly now, "the poison didn't just hurt me. It endangered the life of my unborn child." Mason stopped breathing. His mouth fell open. "Child?" he whispered. "Yes, Mason," Evelyn said, tears finally spilling over. "I'm pregnant. You tried to kill your own heir." The crowd was in a frenzy now. Even Richard Stone looked at his client with horror, backing away slightly. "This is ridiculous." Mason stood up, losing his composure. "She's lying. She poisoned herself. She's crazy. You all saw her yesterday." "Mr. Vanderwaal, sit down," Judge Sterling roared. "I won't sit down," Mason screamed, his face purple. "I am a pillar of this community. I won't be accused by this junkie." "Mr. Vanderwaal," Judge Sterling said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "You claim you are innocent?" "Absolutely," Mason yelled. "I have done nothing but care for her." Judge Sterling reached out and pressed a button on his laptop. He looked at the court reporter. "Let the record show that the following audio was captured by the court's internal security system yesterday, inside this very courtroom, at 11:02 a.m., while the court was in recess." Mason went still. Jenna let out a small whimper. The speakers overhead crackled. "Is she dead?" Jenna's voice filled the room. "No, but she's out of the way. Did you swap the water bottle?" Mason's voice. "I put it in her bag like you said. If they test it, they'll just find vodka." "In her coffee this morning, just a pinch, enough to tip her over the edge." The recording played on. Every word, every laugh, every admission of the plan to steal her money, to gaslight her, to commit her. When the recording finished, the silence in the courtroom was heavier than the grave. Mason Vanderwaal stood frozen, his hand still raised in protest, but his eyes were dead. He looked at the speaker. Then he looked at the judge. Judge Sterling slowly removed his glasses. He looked at the bailiffs standing by the door. "Bailiff," Sterling said softly, Lock the doors. No one leaves." The final crackle of static from the courtroom speakers faded, but the voice of Mason Vanderwaal, cold, calculating, and cruel, seemed to hang in the air like a toxic mist. The recording was undeniable. It wasn't just evidence. It was a confession to conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud, captured in high-definition audio by the very system Judge Harrison Sterling had installed to protect the sanctity of his court. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The court reporter's hands hovered over her stenotype machine, her mouth slightly agape. The jury looked from the speakers to the defense table, with expressions ranging from horror to disgust. Then, the dam broke. It didn't start with a gavel bang, but with a scream, a shrill, piercing shriek that tore through the heavy silence. Jenna Thorne stood up, her chair clattering backward and toppling over. Her face, usually a mask of perfectly applied makeup and smug superiority, was twisted into a rictus of panic. She looked at the laptop on the judge's bench as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. "No!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She spun around to face Mason, her eyes wild. "You said it was safe. You told me the room was swept. You promised me." Mason sat frozen, his complexion shifting from a pale grey to a sickly green. He looked at Jenna, his eyes pleading for her silence. But it was too late. The predator had become the prey, and the rats were turning on each other. "Shut up, Jenna," Mason hissed, slamming his fist onto the table. "Just shut up. It's a fabrication. It's AI. It's deep fake technology." He turned to Judge Sterling, pointing a trembling finger at the bench. "This is a setup. You're working with her. This is entrapment. I am Mason Vanderwaal, and I will buy and sell this entire courthouse before I let you—" "Bailiff!" Judge Sterling's voice didn't need to be shouted to command authority. It was deep, resonant, and final. "Secure the defendants, immediately." The 2 bailiffs, large men who had spent the trial standing stoically by the doors, moved with terrifying speed. They unholstered their handcuffs, the metal glinting under the courtroom lights. Seeing the officers approach, Jenna lost all semblance of composure. She didn't run. There was nowhere to go. Instead, she lunged at Mason. Her perfectly manicured nails, which she had admired during the deposition, became weapons. She clawed at his face, shrieking like a banshee. "You ruined me, you liar! You said we'd be in Switzerland. You said she would be dead. Get her off me!" Mason bellowed, trying to shield his face as Jenna tore at his lapels. The gallery erupted. Reporters were standing on benches, shouting questions, snapping photos of the brawl between the billionaire and his mistress. The flashbulbs popped like strobe lights, illuminating the chaotic end of the Vanderwaal dynasty. "Order! Order in this court!" Judge Sterling banged his gavel, the sound like gunshots in the melee. The bailiffs pulled Jenna off Mason. She was sobbing now, hyperventilating, her designer dress torn at the shoulder. "I'll talk!" she screamed at the approaching officers. "I want a deal. I'll tell you everything. The accounts in the Caymans, the bribed doctors. I'll tell you everything if you just let me go." "You stupid cow!" Mason shouted back as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was audible even over the noise. "You are nothing. I made you." Evelyn watched it all from her wheelchair. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. David Ross stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. But she didn't need the support. She felt a strange, cold clarity wash over her. For months, these 2 people had been the monsters in her closet, the architects of her nightmares. They had made her doubt her own mind. They had made her fear for her life and the life of her unborn child. But seeing them now, disheveled, screaming, turning on each other like cornered animals, she realized they weren't monsters. They were just pathetic, greedy people who had underestimated the one thing they couldn't buy: the truth. As the bailiffs dragged Mason toward the side door leading to the holding cells, he dug his heels in. He looked frantically around the room, his eyes landing on Evelyn. The arrogance vanished. The anger evaporated. In its place was a desperate, pathetic pleading. "Evelyn!" he shouted, struggling against the bailiff's grip. "Evelyn, baby, tell them! Tell them to stop! Think about the company! Think about our image! We can fix this! I can get you the best doctors! I'll fire Jenna! I'll give you anything!" The room quieted slightly, waiting for her response. Evelyn signaled to David. He leaned down, unclipped the microphone from the stand, and held it to her lips. "You're right, Mason," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. "You will give me anything. In fact, you'll give me everything." She paused, her hand resting on her stomach. "But not because you want to. Because you have no choice." Mason stared at her, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The bailiff gave a sharp tug. "Let's go, Mr. Vanderwaal." As the heavy door slammed shut behind them, sealing Mason and Jenna into the darkness of the judicial system, Evelyn let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a year. She slumped back in her wheelchair, the adrenaline fading, leaving her exhausted. "Are you okay?" David asked, crouching down. Evelyn looked at the empty defendant's table. "I'm hungry, David. I think I'd like a cheeseburger." David Ross laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I'll buy you the biggest one in New York." 2 hours later, Mason sat on a metal bench in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and stale sweat. His tie was gone, taken as a suicide precaution. His shoelaces were gone. The bespoke Italian suit was wrinkled and stained. He was pacing the small cage, muttering to himself. "It's fine. It's fine. Stone will get me bail. I'll be out by dinner. I'll fly to non-extradition. Brazil. Maybe Dubai." The heavy steel door buzzed and slid open. Mason rushed to the bars. "Stone! Richard! Thank God! Get me out of here! The judge is insane! That recording is inadmissible. Fruit of the poisonous tree. You need to file a motion immediately." Richard Stone stood on the other side of the bars. He was holding his briefcase, but he didn't look like a man preparing for a legal battle. He looked like a man checking out of a hotel. "There will be no motions, Mason," Stone said, his voice flat. "What are you talking about? You're my lawyer. Do your job." "I was your lawyer," Stone corrected. "I just filed my formal withdrawal with the court clerk." Mason gripped the bars, his knuckles white. "You can't quit. I pay you a retainer of $50,000 a month. I own you." Stone let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Mason, do you understand what just happened up there? The judge invoked a freezing order on all your assets. Personal, corporate, offshore, everything. You couldn't buy a pack of gum right now, let alone pay my hourly rate." "I have money hidden," Mason hissed. "I have cash. And Jenna is currently in the interrogation room 3 doors down, singing like a canary to the district attorney," Stone replied, checking his watch. "She's telling them about the shell companies, the tax evasion, the bribes to the zoning board last year. It's over, Mason. The feds are already on their way to seize the hard drives at Vanderwaal." Mason felt his knees give way. He slid down the bars until he hit the concrete floor. But I'm Mason Vanderwaal." "Not anymore," Stone said, turning to walk away. "Now, you're just inmate 8940. Good luck, Mason. You're going to need it." The footsteps faded away. Mason sat alone in the silence. For the first time in his life, he was truly, completely alone. He closed his eyes and saw Evelyn's face. Not the scared woman he had tormented, but the woman in the wheelchair who had looked at him with absolute indifference. He realized then that the poison hadn't killed her. It had forged her into something harder than he could ever be. A week later, the lobby of Vanderwaal Logistics was quiet. The receptionists whispered behind their hands. The executives paced in their glass-walled offices, sweating through their shirts. The news of Mason's arrest had sent the stock plummeting by 40%. The board of directors was in a panic, holding an emergency meeting in the penthouse boardroom to discuss damage control and how to distance themselves from the scandal. "We need to issue a statement," said terrifyingly corrupt CFO Leonard Vance. "We claim we knew nothing. We paint Mason as a rogue operator. We stabilize the stock." "And what about the wife?" asked another board member. "She's the sole beneficiary if the assets are transferred. She's a nurse, for God's sake. She knows nothing about logistics. We can buy her out for pennies on the dollar." The double doors to the boardroom swung open with a force that rattled the windows. Evelyn Vanderwaal rolled into the room. She was still using the wheelchair to conserve her strength, but she didn't look weak. She was wearing a white power suit that contrasted sharply with the dark mahogany of the room. Behind her walked David Ross and a team of 4 forensic accountants. "Gentlemen," Evelyn said, her voice projecting clearly across the long table, "I believe you're sitting in my chair." Leonard Vance stood up, adjusting his tie. "Mrs. Vanderwaal, this is a closed meeting. We are trying to save this company. Perhaps you should go home and rest. We can discuss a settlement package later." Evelyn signaled to David. He placed a stack of documents on the table. "This," Evelyn said, "is a court order signed by Judge Sterling this morning. It grants me immediate, controlling interest in Vanderwaal via the constructive trust doctrine. Since Mason used company funds to purchase the poison and pay off the staff who gaslit me, the company is technically an instrument of his crime, and now it belongs to his victim." The room went deadly silent. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, locking eyes with Vance, "those men behind me are forensic auditors. They are here to look for the embezzlement that Jenna mentioned in her plea deal, specifically the funds you helped Mason funnel into the consulting accounts." Vance's face drained of color. "You're fired, Leonard," Evelyn said. "Security is waiting to escort you out. Leave your phone and your laptop on the table." "You can't do this," Vance sputtered. "I know where the bodies are buried." "Good," Evelyn smiled, icy cold. "The auditors will need help finding them. Goodbye." She turned her gaze to the rest of the board. "Anyone else who helped him? Anyone else who knew he was poisoning his wife and said nothing? You have 5 minutes to resign. If you stay, I will find out what you did, and I will prosecute you with the same ferocity I used on my husband." 3 board members stood up immediately and fled the room. Evelyn wheeled herself to the head of the table, Mason's spot. She looked out the window at the city skyline. It was the same view Mason had looked at while plotting her demise. Now it was hers. "David," she said, "let's get to work. We have a company to clean." The months that followed were a blur of depositions, board meetings, and medical appointments. Evelyn was ruthless in business, purging Vanderwaal of its toxic culture. But she was fragile physically. The thallium had done damage that would take years to heal. Her nerves were shot. Her energy levels were low. But she held on. She held on for the life growing inside her. Late one rainy Tuesday in October, 5 months after the trial, Evelyn went into labor. It wasn't an easy birth. Her body was still recovering from the trauma. The doctors at St. Jude's were on high alert, monitoring the baby's heart rate, terrified that the heavy metals might have caused congenital defects or weakness. "Push, Evelyn. You have to push," Dr. Baines urged her. "I can't," Evelyn cried, sweat matting her hair to her forehead. "I'm too weak. I can't do it." "Yes, you can," Sarah, her sister, who was holding her hand, whispered fiercely. "You beat Mason. You beat the poison. You beat the lawyers. This is the easy part, Elle. Bring him home." Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of the moment she fell in the courtroom. She thought of the smile on Jenna's face. And then she thought of the future, a future where she was free. She summoned a strength that didn't come from her muscles, but from her soul. She pushed with everything she had left. A cry filled the room. It was the loudest, angriest, most beautiful sound Evelyn had ever heard. "He's here." Dr. Baines laughed, holding up the wriggling infant. "And look at those lungs!" They placed him on Evelyn's chest. He was small, but he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a tuft of dark hair. Evelyn ran her hands over his tiny back, checking him, needing to know he was whole. "Is he?" she asked, unable to finish the sentence. "His APGAR score is a 9, Dr. Baines said, smiling behind her mask. "He's perfect, Evelyn. The placenta shielded him. He's a miracle." Evelyn buried her face in the baby's neck and wept. These weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of victory. "Leo," she whispered. "His name is Leo." 6 months after Leo's birth, the sentencing hearing for Mason Vanderwaal was held. Evelyn didn't have to go. David advised her against it. "You don't need to see him, Evelyn. It's done." "I do need to see him," Evelyn said, adjusting the lapel of her charcoal blazer. "I need him to see me." The courtroom was packed again, but this time the mood was different. There was no suspense. There was only the grim satisfaction of a community watching a tyrant fall. Mason was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He had aged 10 years in 6 months. His hair was grey and thinning. He shuffled in shackles, his head down. When it was time for the victim impact statement, Evelyn walked to the podium. She didn't need a wheelchair anymore. She stood tall, her heels clicking confidently on the floor. She didn't read from a paper. She looked directly at Mason. "For a long time, I asked myself why," Evelyn began, her voice steady. "Why you did it. I was a good wife. I loved you. I supported you. And for that, you fed me poison. You watched me get sick. You gaslit me into thinking I was insane." Mason refused to look up. "But I realized," she continued, "that it wasn't about me. It was about you. You were so small, so insecure, that you couldn't handle a partner. You needed a victim. You needed a pet. And when I started to have my own thoughts, my own life, you decided to discard me." She leaned forward, gripping the podium. "You took my health. You took my trust. You almost took my son. But you failed, Mason, because you forgot one thing about poison. If it doesn't kill you, it inoculates you. You made me immune to fear. You made me immune to men like you." She turned to Judge Sterling. "Your Honor, I don't ask for vengeance. I ask for safety. Keep him away from me. Keep him away from my son. Let him fade into obscurity, where he belongs." Judge Sterling nodded slowly. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Mason. "Mason Vanderwaal," the judge boomed, "for the crimes of attempted murder, conspiracy, wire fraud, and perjury, I sentence you to 35 years in a federal correctional facility. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order. You will never see your son. You will never contact your ex-wife. If you so much as send a letter, I will add 10 years to your sentence." The gavel banged. "Take him away." Mason looked up then. He looked at Evelyn. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse. But Evelyn had already turned her back. She was walking toward the exit, where the sunlight was streaming through the glass doors. She didn't look back. Not even once. The story ends not in a courtroom, but in Central Park on a perfect spring day. The air smelled of blooming magnolias. The city hummed in the distance, a benevolent backdrop to the peace Evelyn had finally found. She sat on a bench, watching Leo. He was sitting in the grass, fascinated by a dandelion. He was robust, happy, and safe. Evelyn took a deep breath. She checked her phone. A message from David Ross. The rebranding is complete. The board approved the new charity initiative. The Vanderwaal Foundation is officially gone. Welcome to the Phoenix Trust. Evelyn smiled. She had erased his name from the buildings. She had erased his influence from the company. A young woman approached the bench, holding a reporter's notepad. She looked hesitant. Ms. Vanderwaal. Evelyn looked up. Just Evelyn, please. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm with the Chronicle. I wanted to ask, after everything, do you ever feel afraid? Do you worry that he'll find a way back? Evelyn looked at Leo, who had successfully decapitated the dandelion and was laughing at the floating seeds. No, Evelyn said. I don't worry about him. Why? The reporter asked. Evelyn stood up, picking up Leo and settling him on her hip. She looked strong. She looked happy. Because he is the past, Evelyn said, and I am the future. She turned and walked away down the winding path, the sun warming her face, stepping out of the shadow of the golden cage and into the light of her own making. Wow, talk about a satisfying ending. Evelyn didn't just survive. She completely turned the tables on the people who tried to destroy her. It's a powerful reminder that the truth always has a way of coming out, sometimes in the most unexpected ways, like a hidden microphone in a judge's empty courtroom. I think the best part was seeing Mason realize that his money couldn't buy his way out of this one. What did you guys think of Judge Sterling's secret recording? Do you think justice was served with a 35-year sentence, or did Mason deserve even more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.